outbound takes a lot of confidence. You hate making cold calls. You hate sending blank template emails because you always bitch about it. Those jobs are going away. The AI agent is going to do it for you and better than you ever did it. But how do you sell to and through partners and make yourself so valuable to them in those one-to-many relationships that you scale trust?
The coldoutreach.com podcast. These are the untold stories of founders and sales leaders who dare to reach out and change everything. Today we've got Josh Wagner. Josh is a partner at InRevenue Capital, and he is the co-author to their new book called The Go-to-Market Cheat Code. In this episode, Josh talks about how to win at go-to-market by leveraging strategic partnerships. He talks about how to send effective cold outreach to land those partners. And he talks about how AI is going to reshape sales as we know it. All right, Josh, welcome to the Cold Outreach Podcast. How are you doing?
Doing well. Great to be here. Appreciate the invite.
Yeah, of course. So your book just launched today. It's the Go-to-Market Cheat Code. And in the beginning of that book, you guys really start by telling, both your backstories, you and your co-author. And so I would love for you to just start by giving a quick synopsis of kind of your background and how you really learned about go-to-market to begin with.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I'm a very relationship-driven individual. And when I think about my career, I grew up in a family of a small business owner, entrepreneur, construction guy, right? So no traditional education, no college, nothing like that, spending my summers sweeping out job sites and hauling lumber, right? In 115 degrees in Phoenix, Arizona here, right? So a little bit of a different thing. And my dad was one of those guys, hardworking, took care of his customers, it was all about just doing the right thing. And he really didn't want that life for my brothers and I, which is a little bit odd because he's such an awesome dude and such an awesome entrepreneur, but gave us every opportunity to go and do different things. So interestingly enough, Justin, who you mentioned, who co-authored the book with me, he grew up in the same small town, which is a suburb of Phoenix that I grew up in. His dad was also in construction. So we have that common bond. We knew each other, 40 years ago, right? We're both 45-ish years old. So we've known each other for a long time. Our paths diverged around high school, which is fine. And you can read about that a little bit in the book. So I'll tell you a little bit about my side of it. But I went to a prep school in Phoenix, grew a great network, and went to Arizona State. So definitely didn't, do the prep school thing and go to some big fancy school. Public school guy. I was a hockey player, played hockey there, and odd enough, hockey in the desert. But I went to broadcasting school. So I always like sports. I like talking. I like doing all those things. I thought this is a thing. Podcasting is actually an outlet for me going back to my childhood, thinking I was going to, be on-air talent at some level. But when I graduated, I got to this point where I was like, man, I don't want to get a job. This doesn't sound that fun. I had done an internship at a radio station selling airtime as a shitty radio station. And, they offered me a job because I had crushed all the people who worked there. I had beat them. And I was like, no, there's no way I'm working here. So I take my entrepreneurial spirit and I said, well, I need to start a business. What is that going to look like? I don't know. Well, my best friend had already dropped out of school. He was working full-time at a media production company, doing a lot of live event production and things like that. Called him up and he said, hey, we're going to start a business. Well, what kind of business is that? We're going to do what you do. Well, you don't know anything about what I do. Well, yeah, you're right, but I'm going to sell it. And he basically hung up on me. And this is my oldest friend, so no big deal. But I get a call from him 2 weeks later. He's like, you know what? I like that idea. I'm coming home. Let's do it. So, the two of us set out, no money, no experience, no contacts. And, we're going to go take on the world. Interestingly enough, that business didn't last more than 5 years, but I will say that the two of us did some good things. Right. And, the only reason it shut down is because we realized really quickly that we had created jobs for ourselves. We didn't create anything that was super scalable, right? We didn't have a lot of systems and back end and things that made this a viable business. But what we did do is we found out that we could sell ourselves really effectively through good partnership. And the event space is crowded. It's nothing new. It's nothing innovative, anything like that. But what we did find was this group that was writing curriculum for automotive manufacturers. And they needed an outlet to deliver that curriculum. And we said, listen, we'll be that event front end for you. We'll handle the logistics, the AV, the video, all of those components that go into that. And that partnership was the lion's share of our business for the 5 years that our doors were open. So, we learned some really valuable lessons, and I definitely learned the lessons of partnerships in that time. So fast forward, we parted ways. We wanted to go get some more, big boy experience. I wound up at an e-learning company in Phoenix that was going through its own transition. It was actually a traditional media production company, got crushed by 9/11 and wasn't making money. So I was thinking, well, how do we take the resources that we have and shift it to something that's a little bit more modern? We're in the 2006, 2007 timeframe. And they said, all right, we're going to become an e-learning company. Well, even at that time, e-learning is sophisticated enough where you're not just going to jump in and be a major player in corporate or higher ed e-learning. So it was, where do we make hay? How do we find a home? So the answer was niche vertical markets, which I thought was great. This is kind of cool. This is entrepreneurial. We can say, hey, what niches are low sophistication, high compliance that we can offer an e-learning solution that makes some sense. So that then got me into this focus of, niche wins. You don't need to be this broad thing. The more focused you are, the better you're going to do. And it also took my partnership thoughts to the next level, because now, great, we can go find these markets, but where do we get the content, right? So if you're an e-learning platform, you have to have content. So what we wound up doing, and I spearheaded this in, I'd say three to four of the 5 vertical markets that we wound up being in, was finding a subject matter expert that we could partner with to bring this platform to market. And it was interesting, right? We would go and find old school dudes that maybe had a training curriculum that they delivered live in the field for mining companies. Was an industry we went into. We went into green building. We went into airports. We went into all these different areas. You find these subject matter experts and offer them another income stream in exchange for subject matter expertise. And voila, you build this thing. So I did that for about 6-7 years, and it was pretty fun, very entrepreneurial. I liked that a lot. In that time, there was a reconnection with Justin and myself, a LinkedIn, hey, what have you been up to, man? Let's grab lunch. And during that time, he was running a payment processing company, and the very, very early days of this professional services consulting company called LeadMD. And so as it may, I sold him some e-learning for his payment processing company that they used as a differentiator. And he sold me Salesforce CRM and Marketo, this marketing automation platform I had never heard of, and the implementation of both of those things. Cool. So you fast forward a few years, I become a de facto expert in early marketing automation. I was a Marketo admin in 2008, 2009, when it was very early on. Justin was already customer number 20 of what became one of the biggest players in marketing automation at the time. And I get a text from him and he says, hey, the firm's starting to ramp up. You understand this stuff. Come help me sell it. Great. Let's go. My course had kind of run over there. So, I go in there in 2014, and it was super interesting because it really validated a lot of the things I thought about partnerships, but it took it to a next level. Like, we kind of hardened it. He was like, listen, I don't want you cold calling people. I don't want you doing this. I want you embedding yourself at Marketo, making friends with sellers, and getting yourself attached to their deals, right? Like that's what we wound up doing. So that's the genesis of the cheat code, so to speak, is just how do you sell to and through partners in a really effective manner and make yourself so valuable to them in those one-to-many relationships that you scale trust. And I spent 10 years with Justin at LeadMD. Justin sold that company in February of 21. I participated in the exit, and then we co-founded InRevenue Capital, an early stage growth equity fund. That's not even a fund, but we can talk about that later. And in 2023.
Love that. So, there's a lot of go-to-market experience here. You obviously have carried the bag yourself, and you're teaching others how to do it. You have an interesting idea, which I think is almost counterintuitive to like ICP, right? So ideal customer profile. Yours is IPP from the book. Mm-hmm. Walk me through, like, how does someone come about that idea, and what does that look like flushed out now?
Yeah, so it starts, as you would imagine, with the customer, right? And the most simplistic way to think about it is, what is your ICP? If you don't have an ICP, you're not going to have an IPP, right? So it's kind of a prerequisite to go through that exercise and figure out where you're going to win the most. It's kind of the simplest way to put it. So you think about that level, and there's an ICP framework and an IPP framework that you can download on our site. If you're listening to this podcast, use the code CONTRA and you can download all of the frameworks that are actually linked in the book for free. So that's something that's available to you as a listener here. But that ICP, really homing in on who is your best customer and building a set of data points around that ICP is super critical, because then you can translate that to an IPP. And what that looks like in the early stages is saying, who has my customers? Who has the greatest concentration of the customers that I want, right? Like that's step one. Step two then is, do we sell then to a similar function within the business? Because it becomes a little bit untenable if I'm selling to marketing and the company that has the highest concentration of my customers sells to finance. There's not a ton of crossover there, right? So then there's that crossover of cross-functional aptitude. And then after that, it gets into a lot of things like culture. How are you going to sell with them? Is it going to be a referral partnership, a co-sell, a co-marketing? There's all those different types of things. And we've built a matrix out for that ideal partner profiling. But at the end of the day, it starts with the ICP. And then does the partner, potential partner that owns the highest concentration of your ICP cross-functionally match with you?
Got it. Okay. So this is super interesting because it's almost like higher leverage outreach when you're reaching out to one person who, like you said, has access to many. So this is very interesting. And in the book you talked about when you guys were building LeadMD, you really leveraged this concept of your outbound was based off the Marketo tracking pixel and how long it had been on some of your target prospect sites. And that led to really well personalized outreach messages. So I'm curious, like and then I think you called that predicting the future. And then you had another concept called twisting the knife. So can you talk about like, what do those two different outreach strategies really mean to you?
Yeah, well, I love predicting the future and twisting the knife. It's a great sales tool, but we can kind of get into that a little bit. So yeah, that was actually a really fun experiment when you talk about cold outreach, right? The idea was, when you implement a platform like Marketo, so right, if we didn't get in on the initial implementation, how could we go find those customers who had recently implemented Marketo or with some period of time that we could say, listen, if you're not doing this at this stage of your journey, you're missing opportunities, right? So that's the overarching theme of what we were trying to do. So what we did was we said, well, Marketo puts a tracking pixel on anyone's site who has it. You can go to, a built with or something like that. Back then there was a program called Datanize. I don't know if you remember this, but it got shut down by LinkedIn eventually, but it was really, really cool. You could take the tracking pixel and you could set triggers off of it, right? So we would use Datanize to say, all right, what companies have inserted the Marketo tracking pixel and at what date? And then we built a nurture program that basically cold outreached those folks and said, hey, congratulations on your purchase of Marketo. You've been on it for 30 days. Typically in the first 30 days, people are doing these things. And it was just kind of an informational thing. But as you graduated through the nurture, hey, you've been on this thing for 9 months. Typically at 9 months, people are doing these things, and what common mistakes are these things. If you want some help getting over those obstacles, here we are, right? And it's really funny. Some of so we built up a workflow for that, right? Datanize tracking pixel, date, build the data set, have the triggered emails go out, nurture them based on time on platform, and then just kind of use that as a cold outreach sequence. Then the BDR would follow through on those types of things. So it was I thought at the time, pretty innovative. Now it maybe is kind of lame with AI and all that, but pretty cool at the time. But what was funny is some people would get mad. They'd be like, what are you doing telling me that I'm doing it wrong, or I'm not mature enough and I'm not using the platform? And I can tell you on at least a half a dozen occasions, we would get a pissed off email, someone saying, this is ridiculous. I can't believe you're telling me this. Within 6 months, they came back and like, you were 100% right. We need to do an engagement. Like it was wild, but it was really fun.
Love that. I mean, so the background with LeadMD sounds like it's helping businesses with their Marketo automation. Now, one thing I was curious about is in your go-to-market strategy, do you have AEs handling the relationship of partnerships, or do you have a dedicated person for that? Like, how does that work within the growth engines that you build?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, because you'll find, software companies specifically as they think about partnerships, one of the first things they do is think about this function and this partner individual. And I frankly think that's a mistake early on because it's just not fleshed out enough, right? Like think about in a startup environment, right? And you want to hire your first AE, you want to get out of founder-led sales. And you're like, I got to get someone in here to go. Well, you can't just go pluck an AE out of Oracle to go sell in a startup. Like it's just not going to happen. They don't have the chops for it. They're not entrepreneurial and stuff. They're used to having systems and process and sales enablement and all these kinds of things. It's the same with the partner thing. Like, yeah, sure, you could find a partner person who's built something from the ground up. But at the end of the day, they're kind of in no man's land because they don't have hard metrics. CEOs don't know how to measure it. It's just kind of this thing that becomes very squishy and relationshipy that sounds good in theory, but then CEOs get pissed off real fast when there's not something like tied to it. So I love in the early stages, and you might get to that place where it makes sense to have a partner person, but in the early stages, have an entrepreneurial AE who's really good, who wants to do something more, tackle a partnership. Because listen, they hold a bag anyway. So what they do needs to be tied to revenue, tied to their quota. But say, listen, I want you to hit your quota through partners. And this is what it's going to look like, right? Like, or maybe you don't know what it's going to look like. Just say, go hit your quota through partners. It depends on how entrepreneurial and sophisticated the person is. But I love the way Jared Fuller said it. If he's is it Reveal Now? I don't know. His book was Nearbound, which is great. And Jared said, if you're in partnerships and you're not the entrepreneur in the room, you're doing it wrong, right? Like it's an entrepreneurial endeavor. And that's how it should be thought about, especially in the early stages of building a partner program within your organization, no matter what size it is, right? Just bringing in a partner person who's going to go out and build relationships is a little bit hard, but having an AE who may be looking for something new, maybe you're a high performer, maybe a little bit more entrepreneurial and looking for something different to go experiment with that and tie their number to this partnership motion is a good way to test it out and scale it out a little bit.
So let's say that somebody is still in that founder-led sales, part of their journey. You talk about in the book this concept of like giving to get, and I'm curious how that plays in. How can you actually do this whole giving to get concept? Is it all about the pilot program you might do for partnerships, or what are some actual tactics that people can use to really get their foot in the door?
Yeah, give to get is a real cultural philosophy that has to come from the top down. And one of the areas where we see partnerships really fall down is just not buy-in that starts from the top and filters all the way down into all the tentacles of the organization. And we talk a little bit about ways to do that in the book, but to answer your question on the front end, I'll give another shout out to someone who was in the book and said this better than I think I could, but Cassandra Golston, who is the CEO of PartnerTap, which is a partnership software, right? I mean, that's their job, but they're a startup, right? I think they've recently raised their Series A, so they're moving along. But she did the exact thing that I talked about at the top of the show, which was who has the highest concentration of the customers I want to sell to. And, after doing the market map, it turned out InPartner was a great fit and they were a complementary offering, not a competitive offering. So instead of saying, hey, CEO, CRO of InPartner, which is a much larger, much more established company, I want to be a partner with you, she went a different route and she went the give to get route, which looked like she went to Salesforce or Dreamforce, excuse me, with the sole purpose of finding leads for InPartner, not for PartnerTap, right? And in the meantime, she had made some friends with some of the sellers at InPartner. And after Dreamforce, she took that, say, 15 leads and dispersed them amongst the sales team at InPartner. In the meantime, she was building her own pipeline and learned that she was in a cycle with InPartner's, one of their biggest customers. So now she had this package that she took to the CRO of InPartner and said, hey, Mr. CRO, I'm Cassandra. I've been feeding your team some leads. Talk to Tony, Sarah, and Jack. They can vouch for it and they're likely in your pipeline. Plus, I've been a deal cycle with your biggest customer. Can we talk? And ears perked up, had a conversation. And that was the genesis of that partnership, which now, they've been a top partner for, year over year. They're, sourcing most of their pipeline through InPartner and all those types of things. But it really started with that mentality of give to get. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen partnerships go wrong because CEOs go, yeah, we're going to partner with those guys. They're a nice logo. And what are they going to do for us? Like it just doesn't work that way.
Yeah. It's almost being more worried about having status as opposed to productivity or like,
Yeah.
effectiveness. One of the things that I want to dive into is where does cold outreach in the sense of reaching out to your ideal customer profile or your customers themselves match in with partnerships? Like, is there a percentage of time that a rep or a team should be spending on based on what stage of company they are? Like, what does that look like to you?
Yeah. And I think it depends on maturity in a lot of cases, because selling professional services and consulting, and, in the early days, we literally just sold Marketo services. And as we evolved and got bigger and scaled, we sold digital transformation. That was the end game, right? So we didn't only partner with Marketo, we built out an ecosystem of partnerships that supported digital transformation. But, even in that iteration, let's say from 2 million to 20 million in revenue, we were able to support 3 reps pretty well. I would say in the later days, 70 to 80% of that pipeline was still coming through partners, and we were augmenting it with some cold outreach. But that cold outreach was very, very targeted, right? And it was targeted by the things you might imagine. Well, what customers were working with our partners, right? Like, we weren't going to just call somebody that didn't have those partners. And what is the message based on some sort of trigger event that we would, set alerts in Zoom Info or Google Alerts or any types of things. Just having a constant feed of, okay, here's the target account list that works with these customers. Here are the trigger events that we're looking for. How can we marry those together and come up with a standard prospecting play? So that's a small company example, right? Whereas I think you start to scale out and you get into a larger organization that has a territories filled with sales teams. And now you've got this partner organization that's trying to find their way. There's a nice blend that I think people don't think about with partnerships and outbound. And the engine has value to your partner. So, the fact that Marketo had an army of STRs was super valuable to us because we didn't have the same engine that they had, right? So how could we augment their SDR efforts with our expertise and knowledge? So that was a value exchange that we went through. And if you're thinking about, are you the bigger player, the smaller player? How do you make these partnerships fit? That's some things you have to think about that are often undersold, which is, listen, we're willing to do outbound for you. Let's come up with an ICP, and then use the ICP, join ICP to really think about it. What are the things that we're going after? You guys handle the SDR cold outbound. We'll support that through this, value motion. Maybe we have a special offer that we do webinars, whatever it may be. And you create that value exchange for what the strengths of the organization are. And I think that gives you a little bit of extra oomph in canvassing the market. And especially if you're a smaller company looking to partner with a bigger company, they're always looking for something to differentiate, right? So how can you help create that differentiation in outbound? How can you create more cachet to their cold outreach? Those of you who have done cold outreach know that in the mid-teens, it was a lot easier doing cold outbound as a Marketo seller when everybody knew who Marketo was than it was at some startup that nobody knew who it was, right? So what is that value exchange? Where can you amplify? It's a lot easier for me to call up, do a cold outbound and say, hey, I'm Josh from LeadMD. We're Marketo's top partner. Then, hey, I'm Josh from LeadMD. Right? Like, there's some value exchange there. So you just got to kind of think through those things and get a little bit creative, because there's a play for everything, right? I hate to say that anything's dead, because nothing's dead. It's just a matter of how you play it and orchestrate them together.
Well, that's very interesting. I want to dive a little deeper into this idea. So that makes a lot of sense to me in the sense of an ongoing value trade where like you're saying, you could divvy up almost your areas of expertise, and that makes a lot of sense then to continue to grow together. But let's say you have an ideal partner and they have an existing customer base. Are there any other things you can exchange of value to really keep, I guess, like picking from their existing customer base? Like, how do you, if it's not something you can necessarily do one-to-one, what other things could you do to, exchange value?
Well, one of the most common, and you see, I use the example of services and software because it's what I did, and it's pretty easy for me to talk about. But often in the tech world, so our other partner at InRevenue Capital is Sean Kester. He came from SalesLoft. He was one of the first. He was the first non-founding employee at SalesLoft. So he literally did everything from SDR, partnerships, sales, product, all those types of things. And one of the things that I learned from him, even in the short time that we've been together here at IRC, is the value in integration partnerships gets undersold a lot. Because what you're doing when you build an integration tech partnership is you're filling a gap in their solution, right? And that doesn't get highlighted enough. Oftentimes it's just like, oh, we integrate with Salesforce. We integrate with whoever, right? But okay, cool. So what? And the so what is what matters. So really thinking about, even if it is someone like a Salesforce who doesn't give a shit about you and are going to be a horrible partner, how can you leverage their cachet into the so what, right? Of, listen, we're a sales partner, we're approved on the App Exchange, but really the value that you're not getting from your investment in Salesforce, we close that gap. And what that integration means to you is unlocking something that you probably bought Salesforce on in the first place, right? And there's 1,000 different examples of what that may be. But I think where tech partnerships fall short is they don't really hone in on the value of what that integration means or what that tech partnership is and use it as a door opener. So there's a great example. I love giving some other people some credit. So a gentleman named Cory Snyder, he just moved over to Outbound Funnel, which is a HubSpot agency. Curtis Ropp, awesome dude. But he was in a tech partnership ecosystem. That's what he ran. And he would sit and listen to chorus calls or gong calls from the sales team. And he was a partner leader. Like, that was his job. And he set up a bunch of triggers in his call recording software that listened to certain objections. And when he would hear an objection come through a call recording, he would automatically pick up the phone, call that rep and say, hey, John, I heard you got this objection from that prospect. Guess what? We have a partner in the tech ecosystem who solves that problem. Why don't you give them a call and co-sell that deal together? Objection handled, right? Like, that's the type of little dirty in the weeds stuff that if partner leaders take the time to do that stuff, now you've added value to your sales team, right? Because oftentimes you hear your own internal sales teams like, I don't get what our partner team does. They don't do anything. They're just out there, like going to lunches and going to conferences and shaking hands, right? And then to your partner's sales team, now you've provided them a lead, a warm lead that has a gap in your solution. You can handle an objection and you can bring that over. So I think that's a super tangible, great example that really can leverage tech partnerships in an impactful way.
That's amazing, because candidly, I've experienced it where I've been confused on where partnerships fall within go-to-market. I've seen it at larger orgs where it's like, what exactly are you providing? Because it seems like we're the ones going to run in the cycle.
Super common.
But now that you've added that insight of, hey, they can actually cross-sell and provide objection handling or provide more insights than maybe I would have even known, I can see where the value add is there. One thing that I since you've been in the weeds quite a bit, what when it comes to cold outreach, was there a specific time or a specific moment where you did cold outreach or a partnership program that led to a major breakthrough for maybe LeadMD or for your career in general?
Yeah. So we'll rewind a little bit, and it goes back to your question early on about ICP. So when I was an intern at a small AM radio station here in Scottsdale, it was a crappy station, right? Like, it doesn't even exist anymore. So I can talk bad about it all I want. But essentially I came in, I sat down, and the GM said, hey, here's your desk, here's a phone book. Good luck, kid. Right? So like, oh man, I don't even know what to do here. So in my confusion, I got up and I wandered into the traffic office and I said, hey, who advertises on this station? And the guy said, basically golf courses and boutique retail. It's like, well, shit, I'm in Scottsdale. It's all golf courses and boutique retail. That's great. So I decided that this was going to be, roughly my ICP for the time being. It slimmed down my white pages that, if you can see my fingers on the screen here, white pages back in the day is probably this thick, if not thicker, down to, a section, right? And now I didn't want to sit in this crappy office all day. So I said, all right, I'm going to, on Mondays and Wednesdays, I'm going to set appointments for Tuesdays and Thursdays. So on Mondays, I'm going to call golf courses. On Wednesdays, I'm going to call boutique retail. On Tuesdays, I'm going to visit golf courses. On Thursdays, I'm going to visit boutique retail. And just that, like, getting focused and finding a niche in your ICP that has a message that actually is going to resonate with someone was an aha moment for me. And ever since then, I've loved, we only invest in vertical SaaS. We were, integrated into a horizontal solution at LeadMD, but it was very niche, right? Like it started with a specific platform. When I did resolutions, we invested in, vertical software, vertical industry, verticals, e-learning solutions. So that early moment of, man, I can't outreach the world. It's just too overwhelming, even though the world was only Phoenix. How do I get more specific, more targeted, and come up with plays that are going to have a message that resonates with someone and improve my chances of being successful? And that's a very early example of doing a lot of really crappy cold outreach, but it did stick with me throughout the last 20, 25 years.
So I'm curious in terms of like present day, I want to talk about the sales cycle to actually sell a partnership. How long, like, I guess if you're approaching, say, a large organization, how do you go about identifying the decision makers, and then also who else needs to have buy-in to really make a partnership work? And how do you approach tackling that problem? Because it's like a faceted problem.
Yeah, and it's a hard question because it depends on how big of an organization you're going to tackle. If it's a big enterprise organization that's got a partner program, there are likely steps and hoops you have to jump through in order to do so. I would say if you're going to do that and go that route, there's a couple things I would consider. One is the juice worth the squeeze, right? Like, is that big logo partner really in the hoops they're going to put you through to be their partner? Are you going to get the return on it? And I would have a really hard conversation with yourself about that, because there's a good chance that you're not going to be you're not going to be anybody, right? You're just going to be a fly on the wall. They've got their gold platinum partners that sponsor their events. They're likely going to get all the cream, and maybe something flows down to you at some point in the future. When we were Marketo's first services partner, Marketo was not the company that people know it as now, as a roll up into Adobe and this massive thing. Marketo doesn't even exist anymore, but it was a smaller company, right? It was easier to partner with. So the first thing is just, is that enterprise partner logo really worth it to you? Because they are going to put you through the ringers, and they're likely going to be in control. So that's one of those pieces of the ideal partner profile matrix that you want to think through. The next then is, okay, if there's another rung down and it's either an immature partner program or maybe no partner program, who do you go after? Is it the CEO? Is it the chief revenue officer? Is it potentially, some sort of partner leader that they put in? And you have to think about what the value exchange is with those people. What problem are you helping them solve? Is it a product problem that you fill a gap for? Is it a go-to-market problem that you can help them fix? You want to at least formulate your draft of your unique value prop with them, or joint value prop. That's going to, as you become a partner, that's going to change and get better, but you almost need to be responsible for coming up with the joint value prop that you're going to take to that organization. And then I would say be ready, if you're reaching out to a potential partner, to have a customer, right? And one of my favorite tests of a young partnership, because a lot of times it sounds good, right? You get the right person on the phone, it sounds great. Everyone's just, thinking dollar signs, saying, I do all these things. But then there's that like inflection point of, where do we start? And nobody wants to be the giver, right? It's really weird. So I think, to me, one of my favorite things to qualify partnerships, like as we were growing, like I said, at LeadMD, and we were trying to figure out what other partnerships look like, this was my rule. We bring a customer, you bring a customer. And if that's not going to work, this isn't going to work. Because if we both bring a customer to the table, there are so many good things that can come out of this. One, we have to pick a customer that's a friendly. They know it's an experiment. They know we're looking at a new partnership, and they're going to go through the process of us joint selling you. It needs to be known up front, right? And then they can go through the hiccups with us and give us feedback and tell us what works, what doesn't. But if we each successfully sell each other's solution in this joint sales process, even with the speed bumps, we've each gained a new customer. We've got a case study, and we can really harden the joint value prop, right? And that's something we can then take to market. So that was one of those things that, like, if you're working with, mid-market companies that, you think is a really good partner fit for you, whether you're on the small side or you're a similar size, it's a forcing function. And partnerships a lot like sales, and people don't necessarily want to hear it. I've actually written about this a few times. You have to qualify partnerships just the same way you qualify a sales opportunity. And if you don't do that, you're going to get yourself into trouble, because partner people will spin their wheels for no output a lot.
Yeah, it seems like when it comes to partnerships, the hardest thing is going from 0 to 1. And then from there, it seems like the relationship is much easier to continue or maintain. But getting that first customer from a partner, at least in my experience, always felt like it was the most difficult aspect. And I'm curious, like, what kind of personality traits, or what would it take from, let's say, the person handling partnerships? I know you mentioned a couple personality traits, a couple of skills, but what would be the most important one in order to be successful as a partner manager for go-to-market, would you say?
Entrepreneurial and sales focused.
Okay.
It's one of those things where it needs to be a function of the sales organization. And there's going to be some marketing overlays and air cover and things like that. But if you want to go as a partner pro, if you want to go and pitch yourself to your CEO and say, hey, I want to build a partner program, or I want to, be your partner leader, or whatever it's going to be, don't be afraid to tie yourself to a number and have a way to back napkin the way into that number. And that really requires making friends with the sales team and helping them understand what the value is that you can drive with them. And some of those examples I gave with Cory and things like that are little tactical things that come up, but there are lots of different types of partnerships out there. There are just pure marketing partnerships. There's, joint ventures, there's channel plays, there's co-selling and all these types of things. My personal favorite is a co-sell. That's just because I love to be the consultant in the room. So the one that was bringing together data, expertise, and sales engineering, so to speak. So with the software folks, my value was, listen, I can be your sales engineer without you having to go into your sales engineering group. And by the way, I don't just look at your platform, I look at the whole ecosystem, right? So I give your buyer a third-party perspective to say, this is how this fits in to your whole marketing mix and your whole go-to-market mix, versus this is this piece of technology that fits into your stack. And that was a different thing. So I think it's important for whether you're a partner person or a seller, where do you fit in? What's the value that you can bring to the joint sale, to the partnership, whatever that may be? And I think it'll help you stay focused, because there are a lot of shiny objects out there that you can be chasing after. So, that focus is super critical.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to transition here to, obviously you and Justin both have expertise in go-to-market. So I'm curious your opinion on, there's this large influx of these AI go-to-market tools, whether it's an AI SDR or these different AI personalization tools. I'm curious, how do you see those kind of advancements affecting go-to-market in general in the next couple of years?
Well, I think to start, it's probably going to completely get rid of the SDR or BDR function as we know it. It's getting too good, and it can handle so much more volume, so much more scale, and it's getting so much more real in its ability to respond in real time, whether it's through voice, text, chat, or email, that it can just, you could set triggers and say go, right? You don't have to do anything. It's just that kind of that thing. What I do think it's going to do is create a forcing function. And this is something I really got after with software sellers a lot, which was, you need to have some business acumen. You need to be able to have a conversation with your buyer at a business level that is very strategic, and you have to be somewhat human about it. So if the AI is going to take away all the crap you hate doing, because you always bitch about it, you hate making cold calls, you hate sending blank template emails, you hate putting data into the CRM, you hate updating your opportunities, you hate doing your forecasts. Well, if the AI agent is going to do all that for you, which there's a pretty good chance it's going to do it for you and better than you ever did it with a heck of a lot more accuracy, when you get your at-bats, those at-bats better be pretty freaking good, right? So this is going to be a forcing function for sellers to up their game, right? Like the show up and throw up, the not being prepped for demos, not understanding their business, asking stupid questions, giving them an interrogation, throwing out discounts on call one when you haven't even built any sort of value. Like all that stuff's not going to fly. Your job is going to be as awesome as you can possibly be and be their business consultant, whatever it is you're selling. You better know the industry, the product, the competition, the value, the everything, so that you can get in the weeds and say, hey, based on what I'm hearing, this isn't a fit. Or based on what I'm hearing, there are three key levers in your business. I think we can help with one of them. And you know what? I know someone who I'm partnered with that could probably help you with the other two. And I think that's going to differentiate how sellers function, because I think there's just been a lot of lazy, we're going to do the monotonous, AI is going to do it for you. Now show us what you got.
Reps can't get away with just banting through calls.
Right. Exactly right.
They actually have to provide value. It leads me to ask, where does AI sit with like personalization and things of that nature? Like how are you guys leveraging AI within your go-to-market engines? Where do you think it sits with personalization? What's your mind space around that?
Yeah, I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but it is, using triggers to outbound is not anything new. And I think AI is going to be that piece of the workflow that's just going to get better, because it was always a little bit clunky, right? Like, okay, maybe a Sixth Sense or a Google alert or something is going to serve something is going to serve something up to you. And then it's up to you to like come up with this. Okay, great. Now that I know this happened, what is my message to the CEO of my target company? Congrats on the funding. Like, how many times have you seen that? Hey, congrats on the Series A. Dude, what's the insight you're bringing to me? And I think that's the difference, right? So the workflow automation, I think, is the real value in AI. And you're going to see a lot of areas, the RevOps function that came out of marketing automation and Salesforce and things like that. It's going to see a lot of upheaval, not just sales, right? Like those jobs are going away because you got a lot of people that created a function, started whining a lot, made a lot of money doing it. And all of a sudden, oh, this whole thing can be automated and way better and way faster than you ever did it. Weird. It's the same thing with sales. Automate all the workflows, the triggers, the things, and let us focus on the message, right? How do we craft something that cuts to the teeth of what does the CEO want to hear? And then use those tools that AI is giving you to cut through the noise. That's a little bit more of where I think it's going to have an impact in the outbound.
Nice. So I'm curious, like you mentioned, like some of those cheesy, like, oh, congrats on the funding. I'm sure you receive a lot of cold outreach yourself. So what are some of your biggest pet peeves on the outreach that you actually receive from people?
Well, the biggest one is you have no idea what I do, right? Like, greetings of the day. We want to be your dev shop. Like, cool. I don't need a dev shop. Take at least the minimal amount of time to understand what it is I do. And I think what's most interesting to me about outbound, and especially when I was doing it myself, and things changed a lot over the years, is outbound takes a lot of confidence, and it takes understanding the persona of your buyer to meet them where they are. So, when I was selling into executives, and even today, right? Like, I'll still cold call other VCs just to be like, hey, I'm a new VC in Phoenix. This is what we do. We don't lead deals. We'd love for you to bring us in a deal, right? Like I sell through partners now. That's still what I do. And I still will do cold outreach to other venture capitalists. How do they operate? How do they communicate with one another? How do they, if you've ever seen two CEOs communicate with each other via text, it's like really choppy, really blunt, really quick. And I found that if you match those cadences to the buyer, so if I'm outreaching to a CEO or to another VC, it's just like that. It's like, hey, this is Josh. This is the problem that we see in a lot of portfolio companies. You deal with this? Cool. Yeah, we can help. Even if it's an email or a phone call or whatever, it's just like get to the heart of it really quick. And don't be afraid to ask questions that cut into their world. You can't just ask broad, like you said, bant questions. Like ask them a question that cuts to the heart of their day to day. Then they're going to perk up and say, oh, this guy gets me, right? Like that's kind of what you want, is for that initial to be like, oh, they get me because they either asked a good question or they said something that gets to the heart of their daily life that might be sitting in front of them right now.
Yeah, oftentimes with decision makers, it seems like one sentence lines that are insightful produce the best results in terms of responses,
100%.
as opposed to like
Yeah.
even just like 2 or 3 lines. But one of the things that I'd love to hear from your perspective, because you've talked about this, like shiny object syndrome when it comes to your partners. Like you can waste a lot of time spinning your wheels trying to find partners. And you had made just a comment offhanded about ideal partnership matrix or a partnership profile. Do you have like criteria for what that would look like? Let's say I'm a $5 million ARR company. I want to start building out a partnership program. Like what kind of criteria am I looking at to go through that process?
Yeah. So we talked about a few of them. Shared ICP, shared cross-functional experience. And then a lot of it starts to get down into the weeds of what type of partnership do you think it's going to be? Is it a co-sell, co-marketing? Is this a channel sales play? What does that potentially look like, and what do they have in place? So then you want to start to evaluate, do they already have a partner program? Where would I fit? And we talked about this a little bit. Where would I fit in that partner ecosystem? Would I be one of a million tech partners that are the integration between, cash to quote, as an example? Well, then, yeah, that maybe not worth your time. So those are some of the big high level things. And frankly, after that, it gets down to culture. Do they have a leadership team that cares about partners? And can you vet that out through other people who have partnered with them? If it's a referral partnership, do they pay the referral fees? Do they provide support? If you call and say, hey, I've got a hot lead for you guys, will they put a seller on it right away? And will that seller not make you look stupid? Right? Like there's a lot of like little cultural things that you'll find really matter, and how they think about partnerships. You can tell when an organization gives partnerships lip service versus it's actually ingrained in their culture and people use it as a go-to function, right? I use the example in the book, and we talked about a little bit, but kind of that top down where the CEO really cares about it, and then it like weaves its tentacles into the rest of the organization. It was fairly easy for us as a sales team to be ingrained in partnerships because that's where we made our money, right? That was our prospecting. That's how we were going to fill our pipeline and make a living. But the majority of our organization was consultants. We're say a 50-person organization, 3 salespeople, the rest were delivering services. How do you get them to care about the partnerships? And this one program that I think Justin did really well was, he called it the Marketo Buddy Program. And this is in the early days. He said, listen, everyone in this organization needs to have a buddy in Marketo. They need to be either in product, customer success, account management. Sales teams got sales, and even then, sales could be fine, right? And be a resource for them, because oftentimes they're overworked. If they're in customer success, they might have 400 accounts that they're working. Be a resource. If they have a question, be a text, be a Slack away, be whatever it's going to be. If they've got a tough challenge that might be be the win or lose on a renewal, jump on a call with them, with the customer, and help them troubleshoot something, right? Whatever it may be. And it was crazy how just that, have a buddy at Marketo different than your neighbor's buddy and help them do something, just created so much momentum between the two organizations. Because now not only would me and Justin go into an executive meeting with Marketo to say, all right, here's our numbers. We did, this much top line. We sourced this much revenue. We co-sold this much revenue. But guess what? You had 15 accounts that were in the red, and 5 of our consultants jumped in on those different accounts and saved them. So, now we're also responsible for saves, retention, renewal, and many times net retention revenue, which was cross-sell and upsell opportunities that those consultants were able to identify and say, you know what, actually, there's a bit of a configuration problem, but if you added this feature, it would actually streamline this whole thing for you, right? So it became this whole organic thing that just started having a groundswell to where our partnership was so much more than just how much pipeline are you sourcing for me. It was just this holistic thing where we were impacting big picture metrics within the business. And I think that culture takes a lot of leadership on the top to say, what does this partner mean to us? Why do we care about them? What are we solving for them? And then most importantly, what are we solving for their customers? And we need to be getting that in front of the customers over and over and over and over again.
Wow. Well, I think there's definitely going to be some, whether it's founders or VCs looking for someone with your expertise to help their startups. Where can they learn more about you, learn more about the book, and how can they work with you?
Yeah, inrevenue.com is our website, and you can find a little bit about us, our portfolio, our background, and our go-to-market value add. And then the book is on the site as well, but it's also where all books are sold. So you can go to Amazon or any of your local bookstores. It's available as of today. And the publisher sent us a little email about an hour ago that said we're already #1 in 3 categories on Amazon. So that's pretty cool.
Nice. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to jump on this call. I think our audience is going to love this. And Phil?
Congrats, Josh and Justin, on the new book. From the read that we've had, it's been amazing. It's a really fun topic. I'm excited to see your guys' growth, and hopefully we can see some really big companies coming from your market engines. GTM.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Appreciate you having me on.
If you enjoyed the podcast and want to stay up to date with the latest episodes, be sure to subscribe to our free newsletter at coldoutreach.com/subscribe.